Hey, what's up YouTube? This is Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads and your front brake rotors on a 2013 Hyundai Accent. Now the first thing I like to do is push the caliper piston back inside the caliper. And you see this little window over here, this opening in the edge of the caliper. A lot of times you can just take a flathead screwdriver and put it in here and pry against the front edge here of the caliper. And sometimes you can fit it either up against the rotor, or sometimes you can get even in front of the other brake pad here, in front of this outside brake pad. If you can, catch that edge and just use the leverage to pry that piston back in. There, you see it moving. Now I'm shifting the screwdriver here back between the rear pad and still pulling it the same direction, and I can feel that caliper piston pushing back in a little bit farther. Now what that does is that frees up room inside here for the new pad material and the thicker rotor, which won't be worn down like this one. Now before you push the caliper piston back in, it's a good idea to pop the hood and take a look at your brake master cylinder reservoir and just make sure that the fluid level is not so full that when you push this back in it will overflow. A lot of times if people top off the brake fluid as the pads wear down, you will overflow that when you push these back in. If the brake fluid has not been continually topped off, a lot of times there will be plenty of room in there. Some people will crack open this little bleeder screw right here, and they'll take off this cap and put a little hose on there and push some of the old fluid out the caliper rather than pushing it backwards up through the system. And that's fine too. That's just another way to do it. It's also a good way to cycle out your old brake fluid. It is a good idea to change your fluid every so often. You just double check your manufacturer's recommendations on that. So here's our brake master cylinder, and you can see that our fluid level, even after pushing it up, is still well below the max. This is very clean and clear fluid, so no need to change it this time. And if you need to take off the lid, you can to verify the level. I can see though here on the side that we're well below the max, and so there's no need to take this lid off. Even when pressing this back in, the compressed air that comes back up in through the cylinder is still able to escape through the lid. It's somewhat vented. That's why pressure doesn't build inside here after you do that. Also, because brake fluid absorbs water, even the water in the air, I try not to take that lid off unless it's absolutely necessary or if I'm adding fluid to the system. Now we can loosen and remove these two caliper pin bolts. These are a 14mm socket that fits on here, or wrench. We'll set those aside. Then we can take off the caliper, and I'm just going to use this little bungee hook with a rope. Just hang it up on the coil up out of the way. You just don't really want to let those dangle from the brake lines, if you can avoid it. Alright, then we can pop out the old brake pads. And now we need to loosen and remove. There's two larger bolts that hold this caliper bracket in place, and those are a 17mm. It's a good idea to have your hand on it when you loosen the last bolt, because otherwise this will fall down. And there's our caliper bracket. These bolts have a split lock washer on them that we'll need to reuse. Now you'll notice on this rotor here we've got two Phillips head bolts, and those are notorious for stripping. So you need to be pretty careful when you take these off. And the method that I've been using, I just use an impact screwdriver that's got this metal rod that goes, you know, the actual shaft of the screwdriver goes all the way through the handle. This is a number 3 Phillips, and what I do is I just put it in there and then I give it a few taps, and then that really seats it in there and it almost jars that loose. And since this has a hex shaft on it, that allows me to put this little wrench on here, just a little crescent wrench, and then just kind of bump those loose. See, and those just come right out. And we are going to reuse those. If you live in a real rusty area, or if these are seized on, or if they strip, you may have to get some replacements for these. So see, I'm not even holding that screwdriver. It just kind of stays in place after you tap it in several times. It really holds it in there, and then just bump that, turn that to loosen. You can take those off. Now, sometimes these rotors will just pop off, and sometimes they really get bonded here with the rust and whatnot, and they'll be seized on. Sometimes you can just hit it with your hand. Sometimes you need to use this here. This is called a rotor remover 9000, or a little mini sledge, and just give it a tap or two. Just one is all it took. Once you take off the old rotor, it's a good idea to clean this hub up with a wire brush. It's a good idea to clean that rust off so that when we put the new rotor on, it will sit completely flush with the hub there. And we can put these screws back in. I kind of use the same method to tighten these as well. Just give it a tap, seat the screwdriver in there. Just make sure that it's good and tight on there. Now, the pads today did not come with these new retaining clips or abutment clips. So we're just going to clean these up really well with a wire brush before we put this back on. But I am going to pull out these slide pins here. You just kind of hold onto that rubber boot and pull and twist this out. We're just going to wipe off the old grease that was in there. This one, it really wasn't too bad, but sometimes I'll put it back in a few times and see if you can get any more of that old grease out of there. And then we'll just hit this with just a little bit of this. This is just sil-glyde that I'm using, but it's a silicone brake grease. Really doesn't take much of this. You'll notice that this slide pin has a little rubber ring around the end. Put that back in, and then this other one, the other one does not have the ring in the end, so just make sure that you don't mix those up. That's why I like to do one at a time. Clean those up here. Just a little bit of that grease on there, and we can put that back in. And just because it's easier to do without putting this in, I'm just going to try to clean off these clips here. If you're in a really rusty area, sometimes rust builds up underneath these clips, and so you need to get underneath there too. Let's just pull that clip off and clean all this area. This one really isn't that bad. Put the clip back in. I'm just going to smear some grease on the surface, this little channel. That's where the brake pad ear, or the edge of the brake pad, will ride, and we just don't want it to bind up in there, and that's the reason for putting some grease in there. Same thing with the other one here. Really not bad at all in there. Really, this one really does not have a lot of rust or corrosion, but we do want to clean them. And same thing, we'll smear some grease in there. And that looks good. So we can put this caliper bracket back on now. Just get those same bolts started down there. Let's just get these snug real quick. Now, the torque spec on these is 73 foot-pounds. This is a gear wrench, 85062 torque wrench. If you don't have a torque wrench, this would be a great one to get. I've used some cheaper ones in the past. I really like this one. It's a lot more, it seems to be a lot more accurate, and it's also got this little sleeve on the collar that helps you lock that in place. But so 73 foot-pounds for this. And then a little bit of this sil-glyde on the back of the brake pad shim here, just where, see where the brake pad is gonna, the brake pad caliper will kind of make contact here, and it seems like this sil-glyde cuts down on some of the noise or dampens some of the vibration. Just make sure you don't get any grease on the surface of the pad. Now we can just kind of put that in at a little bit of an angle. That seems to get it in through those clips, and then just press it all the way up against the rotor. Now I was just putting some sil-glyde here on the other interior pad, and I noticed on the old pad, you see it's got this double shim. It's like this it's almost like a stainless steel shim over the other shim, which is just painted. It's kind of a little rubberized paint on here, and that is a lot of times that will just help dampen. I don't know why they do a double shim here. Some brakes I see like this. So I'm just going to take off this outside shim, and you see it's got these two little dots right here where it lines up with these two holes. So we're going to press that on and use the same shim here too. But I'm going to put a little bit of sil-glyde underneath, and then a little bit of sil-glyde on the outside too. I'm also going to put a little bit of sil-glyde, I forgot to mention on this one here, a little bit of sil-glyde at the ends. That will help the brake pad where it rides in here. It helps prevent that from getting bound up. Same thing, just kind of start it at an angle and then push it into place. And then we can unhook our caliper and bring that down and just carefully set that over the new pads. Now the slide pins, sometimes you have to pull those towards you a little bit to get the caliper to fit over there, to fit over the pads. And then we'll get our caliper slide pin bolts put back in. Now the torque spec on these is 23 foot-pounds, but you'll notice sometimes, especially with the new grease, these slide pins will want to spin while you're doing this. So you may need to grab a 17mm open-end wrench to hold the slide pin still while you torque these. Again, this is the 23 foot-pounds. Same thing down here. And you're done. Just remember to step on the brake pedal a few times until it feels firm, and what you're doing is pushing that caliper piston back out, pressing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. When you do that, make sure you don't press the brake pedal all the way down to the floor. That can damage the seals in your master cylinder. So just push it about halfway down a few times until it feels firm. Also make sure to check the brake fluid level before you head on down the road as well. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.